Hello everyone! I'm happy to see you on my channel. This is a channel about crocheting and knitting, and in this video, we will be making these kinds of socks. What do you think? Are these socks crocheted or knitted? Don't watch the video yet, but write your guess in the comments, crochet or knitting. But I'll tell you right away, these socks are crocheted, 100% crocheted. And they 100% imitate knitting. But this fabric is much more elastic. You see, it stretches in all directions. It recovers its shape, it will be thicker. And it will be more resilient. And you see, in this model, my columns of stitches, they go from the toe upwards. That is, it imitates toe-up knitting. All my previous models were from the cuff down to the toe, but this one will be the opposite. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's start crocheting. Let's start with the gauge and measure how many stitches there are in 10 centimeters. I got approximately 33 stitches in 10 centimeters. Make a swatch with your yarn and your hook and determine your gauge. If you match my gauge, you can use this tutorial exactly as is. If not, you will have to make adjustments. If you have more stitches in 10 centimeters than I do, you will have to cast on more stitches. And if you have fewer, then you'll need fewer stitches. For my crochet project, I will need this kind of yarn. This is a special sock yarn. I have Infinity Sport Cotton, 80% cotton, 12% polyamide, and 5% polyester, 50 grams, 210 meters, the standard yardage for sock yarn. One skein is enough for only one sock. Therefore, for 2 socks, you need, respectively, 2 skeins. My hook is a 4mm, a yarn needle, and a contrasting thread for the foundation row. This is all mandatory. You can't do without it. So I take the contrasting thread, I take the hook, and I'm making 106 chain stitches. The size of my sock is a 36, and for my size 36, I am making 106 stitches. For a size larger, for each size up, I would add one more stitch. So for a 37, it would be 107, for a 38, 108, and so on. For each size smaller, I would make 1 stitch less. But here, I think the pattern is very logical. So I'm making 106 stitches and moving on to crocheting the first row with the main color. So this starting chain will be for this distance, along the bottom of the foot and up to the cuff. And this chain will always be longer than the sock itself, than the fabric itself. Because the fabric is springy, it contracts, but the chain is always long. And I can't tell you that there is some set formula, like you chain 100 stitches and then your sock will be the length you need, and it will shrink to the length you need. No, there is no such formula. The length of this chain and the number of links in this chain are also things you determine from your swatch. That is, you take a ruler, measure how many stitches you need in 10 centimeters. You calculate your foot length, your cuff height, and then you multiply that number by the number of stitches in 10 centimeters and divide by 10 centimeters, and then you will get the number of stitches for your starting chain. You cannot rely on the length of the chain. Mine is always several times longer, and I don't rely on its length. Perhaps for someone else, this chain is crocheted with a different gauge, but I'm telling you how I crochet, and in my experience, I can say that the chain is always longer than the project itself, and that you need to rely on the project, on the swatch. So the stitches are made. I usually make a few more just so the last stitch isn't tight. It will be more convenient in the last link. And now I'm moving on to crocheting the first row. I take the main yarn and my foundation row,
and I make 1 chain stitch. Next, I turn the chain and insert the hook into the back bump. Like this. I work the first row into the back bumps. This is necessary to easily and simply remove the contrasting thread at the end. 1, into the next spot, 2, and I'm working the first row with slip stitches, the most ordinary ones. 3, 4, 5, 6. For the first row, I work 106 slip stitches.
Okay, the first row is done. Next is the second row, and all the other rows up to the 11th will be worked like the second one, including the 11th. Chain 1 for the turn, turn. I insert the hook into the second stitch from the hook, into the back loop only, like this. I pick up the working yarn, make a slip stitch, and in the second row, I work 106 slip stitches in the back loop only. And I work in these turning rows, as I already said, up to the 11th row inclusive. I'm approaching the end of the row and the last stitches in this row. This will be the 105th. And into the next spot, 106th. Chain 1 for the turn, turn, and the third row. Everything is exactly the same. Second stitch from the hook, insert the hook and start working slip stitches. Look here, one small clarification. This technique does not like overly tight stitches, so I crochet loosely. I don't tighten it. I take a hook that is 1 size larger than recommended for the yarn. For this yarn, by the way, a hook wasn't recommended at all, only knitting needles. That is, you need to crochet loosely, then you will get a beautiful and elastic fabric. As I already said, I'm working in these turning rows. We'll meet there and I'll show you what to do next. So I have crocheted 11 rows. This is this part on the finished sock. And now I'm moving on to the 12th row. The 12th row will begin the shaping of the toe. And the 12th row will be the first short row for the toe. Okay, 12th row, chain 1 for the turn, turn, into the second stitch from the hook. Everything is the same. I start making slip stitches, and I work with slip stitches. I don't go all the way to the end of the row, leaving 2 stitches. So it turns out in the 12th row, there are 104 slip stitches. I've finished the 12th row, and next will be the 13th row. In it, the gusset for the heel will begin. For the heel, I place a marker on the 62nd stitch from the toe. Here, in centimeters, it's about 21. Look, my foot is maybe 22.5 centimeters. I'm setting it at 21, but actually the yarn is so stretchy that all these centimeters and their measurements are relative, meaning I can stretch it here to 22 right away, so it seems to me you should set it approximately at your foot length from the toe. I just already made one sock, frogged it, made a second one based on it, and I ended up with this distance to the heel of 62 stitches. If you are just following my tutorial and my gauge works for you, then if you have a larger size, for each next size you add 1 stitch here. So for a 37, it's 63, for a 38, it's 64, and so on. For each smaller size, on the contrary, you decrease by 1, and in this way you will get your sock size. Next, I take the hook and start crocheting the 13th row. The 13th row will have the heel gusset, meaning it will go from here, then we work the heel gusset here and go over to here. That's why it's a very, very long row. So chain 1 for the turn, turn. There were 2 stitches left over here, so there are only 60 stitches left to the marker, meaning the 60th stitch of this row is the apex of the heel, and I work 60 slip stitches to the marker.
In the back loop only, everything is the same. Let's meet there.
I'm approaching the marker. I work the marked stitch. I make a slip stitch here as well. Let me move the marker a bit, like this. And then the heel gusset begins. For the heel gusset, I first make a connection as I go. Here, I will work 2 slip stitches. 1, and into the next spot, 2. Next, I do not make a turning chain here. In this exact spot and in these turns, a turning chain is not made. I count from the hook 1, 2, 3, and insert the hook into the 3rd stitch in the back loop only, and I make a slip stitch, and I work 20 slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 19, 20.
In the first row of the heel gusset, this will be this row, I make 20 stitches, chain 1 for the turn, and turn.
And in the opposite direction, I work 20 stitches again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 19, and the last 20th. And so I've crocheted the first pair of rows for the heel gusset. Next I do the join. That is, this side will now be vertical, and now I will be making joins with the vertical side like this. So I insert the hook into the sidebar from the previous rows like this, and immediately into the back loop of the row below, I make 1 slip stitch, and into the next spot I make a 2nd slip stitch. This will be the join. I turn the work and start again in the 3rd link from the hook. 1, 2, 3. I don't make a turning chain at this point. I insert the hook into the 3rd link from the hook, pick up the working yarn and work slip stitches. I work 18 slip stitches here. So with each pair of rows, I will decrease the number of slip stitches by 2. Until I get down to 2, just 2 slip stitches, until my gusset becomes a wedge. That is, here is the last row, there are only 2 slip stitches here.
I'm working 18 slip stitches. I don't work the last 2 stitches to the edge, as I already said.
2 stitches remaining, chain 1 to turn, and then work 18 slip stitches back in the reverse direction.
I'm approaching the last stitches. I recommend always counting the stitches here in every row, in every gusset. Always count the stitches to make sure you haven't worked anything extra and haven't missed a stitch anywhere. And I do the join again. So I insert the hook into the sidebar like this and go into the row below, into the back loop, 1, and into the next spot, 2. Turn into the 3rd link from the hook. I don't make a turning chain, and in this pair of rows, there will be 16 slip stitches. Well, in general, I think this point is clear. We work like this: 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. And 2 will be the last row in the gusset.
In total, I have 10 pair of rows for the heel gusset. 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10. Why 10? Because I start with 20 stitches. 20 divided by 2 is 10. If you use any other number of stitches for the first row of the heel, you will get a different number of row pairs. If you start with 18 stitches, you will work 9 pairs of rows for a total of 18 rows. So the pattern is the number of row pairs equals the number of stitches in the first row of the heel gusset
divided by 2.
I'm almost finished the gusset. I'm stopping at the last pair of rows. Here I need to work 2 stitches back and transition to working the cuff. So chain 1 for the turn, turn, and make that very last row of 2 stitches. 2 slip stitches in the back loop only.
1, 2. I insert the hook into the sidebar, like this, and into the row below. And I continue working slip stitches. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. And it turns out, in the last section, I have 26 stitches. 24 is the cuff, and 2 stitches are still part of the heel gusset. This number, 26, needs to be remembered, because first, we will crochet 1 gusset, and then on the opposite side, we will crochet the second gusset. And this is where this number will come in handy. And that was the 13th row. And with that, the 13th row, this was all one 13th row, is finished. Next, the 14th row. Chain 1 for the turn, turn. And the 14th row, this will be a row that will be shorter by another 2 stitches at the toe, but it will also run along the heel gusset and gather all those stitches. So, look, how is the 14th row worked? I've made the turning chain. Next, into the second stitch from the hook, I start working slip stitches. And first, I work slip stitches until I reach the first step of the heel. So I'm approaching the first step of the heel. And here I need to do a join. In general, the rule for this whole sock is if I see a step, I make a join. How will I make the join? I insert the hook into the sidebar and also pick up this little thread. Look, here's 1 thread. You can use a smaller hook here if it's difficult, 1 thread. And here's the second one, because this yarn, I can't pick these up. It's springy and it pulls its stitches tight. There, now I've got it. There, look, I picked up 2 threads. At each step, I pick up these 2 threads, yarn over, and insert the hook right there, also into the back loop of the row below. And I pull the working yarn through all the loops on the hook. I tighten. This creates a join. It will look beautiful from the right side and the wrong side, in such a way that the sock will be simply reversible. Into the next spot, a regular slip stitch. Again, a step. So again, 2 little threads like this. Well, I think this is visible, right? There, I inserted it. I yarn over and into the row below. I pull it out. I tighten. And into the next spot, a slip stitch. Again. A join, and a slip stitch. Again, I insert into the 2 little threads, okay. Yarn over, into the row below, and I make the join. So basically, the join is a slip stitch with a yarn over. But at the same time, you see it also catches these 2 threads at the step. yarn over, and into the row below. And it looks very beautiful from the side that you don't see right now. I'll show it to you at the end of this row. Again, a join. And a slip stitch. And again, a join. It doesn't want to go in. I did it correctly. Yarn over, then into the row below, and then I work it. And a slip stitch. Again, 2 little threads, yarn over, and into the next spot, a slip stitch. And a slip stitch, and the last join in the gusset. I inserted it, yarn over, and into the row below, and there's our join. And I finish this row, not to the end. I leave 2 more stitches at the end. How many stitches in total? In this row, I will count. I'll tell you. I count all the stitches here as just slip stitches. I'm not going to calculate it here. 26 slip stitches. Then a join. No, I just count everything as slip stitches, because you might have your own number, a different number in the heel. But anyway, I always consider all these stitches as just slip stitches. I'm working up to this point. And so I finished, it turns out, the 14th row. I have 82 stitches in it. I left 2 stitches again for the toe. And the 15th row, everything is simple here. Chain 1 for the turn. From the second stitch from the hook, I start making slip stitches. In the 15th row, there will be just 84 slip stitches. In the back loop only.
Row 15 is ready. Next is row 16. Row 16 will be 2 stitches shorter than row 15. So chain 1 for the turn. Everything is exactly the same. I start in the second stitch from the hook in the back loop only, and in row 16, I work 80 slip stitches in the back loop only. This means I won't reach the edge of the previous step by another 2 stitches. And thus another step is formed. Row 16 is ready. In it, I worked 80 stitches. Next is row 17. Chain 1 for the turn, and in the 17th row, I start again. In the second stitch from the hook, in the back loop only, I work slip stitches. In the 17th row, there will be 80 slip stitches, the same as in the 16th.
Row 17 is ready. Next will be row 18. So row 18, chain 1 for the turn, and in row 18, just the same, starting in the second stitch from the hook, I start making slip stitches in the back loop only. In row 18, I will have 78 slip stitches. That is, I leave another 2 stitches here unworked. Thus, another step is formed.
Row 18 is ready. Row 19, chain 1 for the turn. Into the second stitch from the hook, I insert my hook and work 78 slip stitches in the back loop only. And so row 19 is ready. And with that, the first part of one side of the toe shaping is ready for me. Look, this is what this shaping looks like. The whole thing, I mean not this one, but this one. This part of the shaping is ready for me.
In it, I have 4 pairs of short rows. 1, 2, 3, 24. And this fifth step, this was a full row. Next, I'm making the second half of the shaping. This was the first half. And now there will be the second. The second half will be worked in exactly the same way, only as a mirror image. That is, I will start the second shaping with the shortest short row, then I will lengthen by 2 stitches, then I will lengthen by another 2 stitches, and so on, until I reach the full number of stitches. And this will be row 20. So, row 20, chain 1 for the turn, turn, into the second stitch from the hook, I insert the hook, and in row 20, I will have exactly the same number of slip stitches as in the 19th. That is, I crochet right up to the step, right up to here. Row 20 is ready. In it, I worked 78 slip stitches. Row 21, chain 1 for the turn, turn, into the second stitch from the hook, I insert the hook and start making slip stitches, in the back loop only. In row 21, there will be 78 slip stitches, just like in row 20. Row 21 is ready. Next is row 22. Chain 1 for the turn, turn, again, everything starts traditionally. Into the second stitch from the hook, I insert the hook, and here I work 80 slip stitches. That is, this is 2 stitches more than in the previous row. Look, this row will go up to the step, to the first step. It consists of 2 pairs of rows here. That is, it will be a high step. It will make the join and go to the edge of the next step. How is this done? I'm reaching the first step, one more stitch. I've reached the first step, 2 rows, 2 pairs of rows. What do I do in this case? I insert the hook in almost exactly the same way, into 2 little threads, like this. I insert into 1 step, and in the same way, I insert the hook into 2 little threads of the second step. Then I yarn over, like this, and bring the hook out into the row below, into the back loop. I pick up the working yarn and pull the loop through all the loops on the hook. I tighten, and into the next spot, I make a regular slip stitch. There it is, row 22, and there it is, the join in row 22. Row 23, chain 1 for the turn, turn, and in the opposite direction, in the back loop only, there will be just 80 slip stitches. As usual, as we've been crocheting all this time, I start as always in the second stitch from the hook. So, row 23 is ready. Row 24, chain 1 for the turn, turn. Again, I start in the second stitch from the hook. Slip stitches in the back loop only. And in row 24, I will have 82 slip stitches. So that's another 2 stitches more than in the previous pair of rows. I reach this point. Here, I again make a join across 2 rows, and then I work up to here. Okay, I'm approaching the step again. This is the 80th stitch, and then the row below will be 81, 82. Now the join. Again, I'll repeat one more time how the join is made. Into the 2 threads of 1 step, I insert the hook. I remind you, if the hook doesn't go in easily, right now mine won't go in at all, you can take a smaller hook. So I inserted it into the 2 threads of the next spot. Then I yarn over and bring it to the row below. I tighten, 81, and into the next spot, like this. 82, and that was row 24. Row 25, chain 1 for the turn, turn, it's simple. Here, it's just 82 slip stitches in the back loop only. Row 25 is ready. Row 26, chain 1 for the turn, turn, into the second stitch from the hook, I start making slip stitches, and in this row, there will be 84 slip stitches, meaning it will again be 2 stitches longer than the previous steps. '81 and 82. And again, I find myself at the step. Everything is exactly the same. I insert the hook, 2 little threads, so I've inserted it. And into the next spot in the same way. Into 2 little threads, I inserted it. Then I yarn over on the hook and into the row below. That's 83. I tighten. Into the next spot, 84. That was row 26, now row 27. Chain 1 for the turn, turn, and in the opposite direction. Row 27 is just 84 slip stitches in the back loop only. I start as always in the second stitch from the hook. Row 27 is ready. Next will be row 28, and this will be the first full row. It will be the first row that reaches the very edge of the toe. So it will have 86 stitches, and this is the initial value. Chain 1 for the turn, turn. I insert the hook into the second stitch from the hook, and I start working slip stitches in the back loop only. As I already said, in row 28, there will be 86 slip stitches. Where does this value, 86, come from, and how do you get it? How to check yourself if you chained a different number of stitches and worked with a different yarn. Remember, at the beginning, I chained 106 stitches? That was my foundation. If yours is different, then it's different. And right here, I made the heel with 20 stitches. So 106 minus 20, because that's exactly 20 stitches I decreased here, that comes out to 86. Accordingly, you check yourself in the same way. Your foundation count minus the number of stitches in the first row of the heel gusset. This should give you the number of stitches in this remaining part. For me, it's 86. So I work up to here. Here, I make a join again and work 2 more stitches from the row below. So I'm approaching the step, I make a join again. I'll show it one more time. So I insert the hook like this and into the next row. Like this, and now the row below. No, and now I yarn over, and only now the row below. And I make a slip stitch. That's 85, I tighten, and into the very last spot, 86. I repeat, I recommend counting the stitches in every row because it's very easy to make a mistake here. Very easy to not finish something or, on the contrary, add something, and then your stitch count will be off. That was row 28. Next is row 29. Chain 1 for the turn, turn, into the second stitch from the hook, I begin crocheting. And in row 29, there will be 86 slip stitches. And I am finally moving on to working full rows. The first part of the shaping at the toe is ready for me. Here it is. And on the second half, there will be a second, identical one. Now I'm working full rows of 86 stitches. And in this part, I need a total of 10 of these full rows. 10 pairs of full rows. I have already started forming one pair, that's 28, 29, and accordingly, with full rows of 86 stitches, I crochet up to row 47 inclusive. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Let's meet there. There, the shaping for the second side of the toe will begin, and then we will move on to the second heel gusset.
All right, I've finished row 47, and now we'll begin the second part of the toe shaping. So that was the first section, and now the second one begins. It's worked in exactly the same way. We will start with 4 pairs of short rows here. The first one will leave 2 stitches unworked. The second will leave another 2 stitches unworked. The third will leave another 2, and the fourth will leave another 2 stitches unworked. So it's the exact same process as the first section. I'll just add the row numbers and their stitch counts on the screen for you during editing. Please refer to the on-screen chart for this part because I won't be explaining it all in detail a second time. Okay, so I've crocheted 55 rows, and that completes the first shaping section on this second half of the project. The next shaping section will be worked exactly like the shaping on the first half. This means I'll start with the shortest row, which will come up to about here. Then I'll work a pair of rows that are 2 stitches longer, making a join right here. Then another pair that's 2 stitches longer, and another one after that. So I won't be showing this step by step again. Instead, I'll provide the row numbers and stitch counts for you on the screen. Now, pay attention. In the second to last lengthening row, we will start to shape the heel. I will write out the row numbers and their stitch counts for you. So please work up to that point, and I'll meet you back here when you're done. Then we'll begin shaping the second heel gusset.
All right, I've finished row 61. Next up is row 62, and it needs to reach all the way to this edge here. This will be the second to last lengthening row, and it's in this row, row 62, that we start to create the second heel gusset, which will be a mirror image of the first one. So I will first crochet across like this, and then I'll begin the short rows to form the second gusset, continuing across to finish over here. This whole thing will be row 62. So look, here's how it's done. Chain 1 and turn. Remember at the end of the row with the first heel gusset, I asked you to remember a number? For me, it was 26. I'm recalling that number now and working 26 slip stitches in the back loop only. As always, I start in the second stitch from the hook. 2, 3, 4, 5, 26. Okay, I've made 26 slip stitches. Now we begin to crochet the second heel gusset. Chain 1, turn. The second gusset is worked as a mirror image of the first. This means where we started the first one with 20 stitches and ended with 2, here we do the opposite. We start with 2 stitches and we'll end with 20. I insert my hook and crochet 1 and 2. Chain 1 for turning and turn. Now I'm forgetting about how I did the first gusset. There are no special elements here like inserting into the third stitch or not making a turning chain. Here we do everything normally. I always make a turning chain at the beginning of each of these short rows. Now for 4 stitches. I've made my turning chain. First into the slip stitches, 1, 2. And now for 2 stitches from the row below, which means I need to make a join. The join is always done the same way. I insert the hook under the 2 strands of the step like this, yarn over, and guide the hook into the stitch on the row below. I pull it snug, that's 3, and that's 4. Chain 1, turn, and again, back into the slip stitches, starting from the second stitch from the hook. 1, 2, 3,
4.
Chain 1, turn. And now 6 stitches. Each pair of rows gets longer by 2 stitches. And I take those 2 new stitches from the row below. Okay, I've made my turning chain. Now I crochet 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, I've reached the step, so I make the join, insert the hook under the 2 strands like this, yarn over, 5, pulling it snug, 6, chain 1, turn, and 6 stitches back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, chain 1, turn. Now for 8 slip stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I make the join. Yarn over on the hook into the main row. 7, 8. Chain 1, turn, and 8 slip stitches back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Chain 1, turn. I continue working rows like this, lengthening by 2 stitches each time until the number of stitches in the final pair of rows becomes 20. Why 20? Because in the first gusset, we started with a pair of rows that had 20 stitches. Both gussets must have the same height and length. They need to be identical. So I'll finish this section here, working until I have 20 stitches in a pair of rows. Okay, I've crocheted the heel gusset. In my last pair of rows here, I had 20 stitches. Now, I finished this row. This is all still one single row, row 62. I crocheted to this point here where there's a step. I'll make the exact same join we've been doing all this time. When I get from this point to that point, it will be 60 stitches, and there will still be 2 stitches left before the edge. So that's 62 stitches in total. That's the exact number for the heel peak where we placed a marker at the very beginning when we set aside stitches for the first gusset. These 2 values must match. If your number here isn't what it should be, it means there's a mistake somewhere. Chain 1, turn, and I work 60 slip stitches in the back loop only, starting as always in the second stitch from the hook. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 20. Here's the join. I insert the hook into the bridge and the loop, yarn over, and go into the main row. That will be 21, 22,
23. I'll crochet up to this next step and meet you there.
And I've worked 58 stitches. I've reached the step. I make the join. I insert the hook under the 2 strands. Then again under 2 strands. Yarn over on the hook and insert the hook into the main row. That's 59 and 60, and that was row 62. Chain 1, turn. For row 63, we work back. Insert the hook into the second stitch and crochet 60 slip stitches in the back loop only. Until I reach the heel peak. Then we will switch to working along this edge of the heel gusset and continue on to the cuff. Let's meet here, and I'll show you how to work this part. Okay, I've worked the 60 slip stitches. I've reached this side. I have 10 pairs of rows in my gusset here, and I need to make 2 slip stitches into each pair of rows. Here's how I do it. I insert the hook into a stitch loop and a bar behind it. 1, and then into the space between the rows. 2. Again into a loop and a bar. 3. Into the space between rows. 4. Into a loop and a bar. 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. 10. 11. 12. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and the last pair, 19 and 20. Now I finish the row to the end. "21, 22, 23, 24, 43, and that makes 44.
There, that was row 63. In it, I first crocheted 60 stitches and then 44. That's a total of 104 stitches. There are still 2 unworked stitches from the start. 104 plus 2 is 106, and that is the exact number I cast on with my contrast yarn at the very beginning. If these 2 values match, everything is correct. If something didn't line up, it means there's a mistake somewhere.
You either dropped a stitch or added one. Now I'll start row 64. Chain 1, turn. This will be a full row. It will have 106 stitches worked in the back loop only, starting as always in the second stitch from the hook. This row will be worked all the way across. I'll make a join at the step, and it will end right at the very edge of the toe.
And I'm approaching the step, so I make the join again. I insert the hook. I insert the hook under 2 strands once, then under 2 strands again, yarn over, and into the main row. This will be 105. And into the next stitch, 106. And that was row 64. In this row, I have returned to my original stitch count. For row 65, chain 1, turn. And starting in the second stitch from the hook, I begin working slip stitches. There will be 106 of them as well. This is the first pair of full-length rows, rows 64 and 65. On this part of the sock, the sole, I need a total of 5 pairs of full-length rows. So I've just made the first pair, which means I need 4 more. This means we will be working up to and including row 72. You will form 4 complete pairs of full rows, and the 5th and final pair will be created when we seam the sock together. This way, the sole part will also have 10 full rows, just like the upper part. Look, the sock is wonderfully stretchy. This fabric is just insanely elastic. But let's say you're making a sock a size larger than mine, and you need to make the foot itself wider. Although I think this calculation would still fit because I repeat, the sock is very stretchy. But let's say you have that goal. In that case, you would add 1 more pair of full rows to the top section. Where I have 10, you would have 11. And you would also add 1 more pair of full rows down here on the sole. Where I also have 10, you would have 11. It doesn't matter at all where on the sole you add that extra pair, at the beginning or the end. The seam I used to join this sock is invisible. It's a precision seam. You can't find it. Consequently, whether that seam shifts a little to the right or a little to the left is completely irrelevant because it will blend in with the fabric itself. So, continue working up to and including row 72. Let's meet there and I'll show you how to seam our sock.
I've finished crocheting the whole sock. I've worked row 72. Now I cut the yarn. Look, I leave about 20 centimeters of yarn here and cut it. And then I unravel row 72. This is needed to measure the yarn, to know exactly how much yarn will be needed for seaming this project. And I use this technique everywhere, not just in socks. I use it in mittens, fingerless gloves, hats, and other items that are worked like this, in a tube with slick stitches. So I unravel it to the very end. Now this length of yarn will be exactly enough to make the seam. I thread this tail into the needle, and I position the project as follows. The foundation row with the contrast thread is at the bottom. The live loop is in the top right corner. Here, I close this live loop with the needle. I pull it snug and move on to seaming this project. I fold the project like this into a tube. I look at how the contrasting thread picks up the stitches of the first row. The contrasting thread is a guide thread. It picks up 2 little threads like this. I insert the needle in exactly the same way and bring it out. I pull it snug. On the other half, I insert the needle into the just closed loop, I pull it snug and bring the needle back through the edge stitch and through the loop I just made. And I pull it snug again. And this is the first stitch. So, next, the second stitch. Again, I look at how the contrasting thread picks up the threads of the first row, like this. This is exactly how I insert the needle. I also pick up these 2 purple threads. Then I insert the needle into the loop, into the edge stitch. Away from me, I pull it snug. Into the next edge stitch and into the loop towards me. And I pull it snug again. Here, you need to tighten with the same tension we used for crocheting, so that the seam doesn't stand out from the main fabric. Again, I pick up with the needle the 2 threads that the contrasting thread is holding. I pull it snug, and I bring it into the loop, into the edge stitch. I bring the needle out, pull it snug, into the next edge stitch and into the loop. And I pull it snug again. Again, I pick up the 2 little threads that the contrasting thread is wrapped around. Into the loop, into the edge stitch. I pull it snug, and into the edge stitch, and into the loop. Look, I've already sewn 4 stitches. Continue working in exactly the same style to the very end of the row. If this explanation of the seam is not enough for you, just these 4 stitches, then in the previous video, I spent a long, tedious 20 minutes just sewing this very same sock. Well, not this one, but the first sock. It's the same thing. Go to that video and just watch how I sew the first sock in more detail for a longer time. But in this video, I'll finish sewing the sock to the end. And let's meet right here. I'll show you how to sew up the toes. I'm approaching the end of this seam. Sewing up the toe. Into the edge stitch. Into the loop. I pick up the 2 little threads. Into the loop, into the edge stitch. Into the next edge stitch, into the loop. Again, I pick up the 2 little threads. Into the loop, into the edge stitch. Into the next edge stitch, into the loop. Again, I pick up the 2 little threads. Into the loop, into the edge stitch. Into the next edge stitch, into the loop. The last stitch. Here too, I pick up the 2 little threads. Into the edge stitch, into the loop. My starting tail and ending tail meet at one point. For now, I'll tie them in a knot like this. This is all correct. At the beginning, I had 106 stitches, and at the end, also 106. That's why my seam came together perfectly. If there was a discrepancy somewhere, a mistake somewhere, and you came to the end with 107 stitches or 105 stitches, then of course your seam wouldn't match up. You would have extra stitches left on one part of this seam. Next, easily and simply in one motion, I practically remove the contrasting thread. First, you need to open the foundation row. There was a chain here. I open it. And I pull, and you see, this thread is removed easily and simply. It's removed from the knitting. All right, the threads are removed, and now I need to hide the ends and sew the toes. First, let's determine the right side of this project. Look, both sides here will be very beautiful, and both are wearable. That is, this is one side and the second side. It seems to me everything is beautiful here and here too. And here's the toe. Here these little branches meet. And the second side. I was actually going to use the second side as the right side. Look, it's a little different here. Here in the heel, here are these beautiful joints with yarn overs. Like this, you see, they blend into each other. And the second side. And here's the toe. Here, the little branches also come out of each other. Well, the yarn is like this, kind of curly. It's not very visible on it. And perhaps I will use this side as the right side because I already did that with this sock. So I turn it inside out. Here's this knot. I didn't tighten it too much. I'll undo it now. Look, and then I just need to hide the ends without a knot, following the direction of the stitches. I do it with the needle like this. 1, 2, 3, and I wrap the needle like this. The neighboring column of stitches to pull the yarn through there. I take this short tail, this was the beginning tail. I thread it into the needle and weave it in. And I adjust it here. I adjust everything. Well, and the second, final tail. I do the same thing with it. I thread it into the needle. And I weave it in, over here. And I also wrap the needle along one of the columns of stitches. I adjust it and trim the tails. And now the final touch. I need to sew the toe. You need a thread here. Look, it doesn't need to be especially long, right? So it should be long enough to go along the toes twice. In principle, this tail of mine is quite sufficient. I fold the toe like this, stitch to stitch, and work as follows. I insert the needle into the bars, 1, 2. And on the next side, also into the bar, and I pick up the thread, 1, 2. I pull it snug, leaving a tail about this long. Again, into the next spot, again, into the bar, 1, 2. Into the next one, into the bar, 1, 2. I pull it snug and alternate like this to the end of the row. On one side, on the other, on one side, on the other. And probably like this will be the last stitch. Now I pull it a little snug. And I go through in exactly the same way in the opposite direction, so that my threads meet again at one point. And I'll just tie them there in a simple knot. So, like this, and I just tie them together here in a knot. And in the same way, I hide the tails along one of the columns of stitches, as I did with the previous tails. For example, like this, and from the other side like this. And with that, the sock will be ready. This is the kind of sock I made in this video, and here is its second companion. This sock I have already washed, steamed, and in general, it has gone through all the finishing steps. But this little sock has not yet gone through all the finishing steps. But this yarn lays beautifully, even in a sock that hasn't gone through finishing. This is how it turned out. Let's take all the measurements. So, the foot length here is about 21-22. But believe me, it's incredibly stretchy. So, for a size 38, this calculation will also be really good. And the height is 13-14. The width is 7-8, probably 8. And here it's also 8. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks in advance for your likes. Subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon so you don't miss anything. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.